The morning sun cast long shadows across the twisted metal and scorched concrete of Pearl Harbor as Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rashford hunched over his desk, surrounded by towers of intercepted Japanese messages. It was late April 1942, and the cryptanalyst hadn't seen his family in weeks. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, yet his mind was sharper than ever. Something monumental was coming. He could feel it in the patterns of enemy communications, in the surging radio traffic that flowed through Station Hypo like a river threatening to burst its banks. Outside his windowless office in the basement of the 14th Naval District Administration Building, the Pacific Fleet was a shadow of its former self. 4 battleships lay at the harbor bottom. Hundreds of aircraft had been destroyed. More than 2,000 Americans had perished on that infamous December morning. The Japanese had struck with precision and overwhelming force, leaving America's Pacific defenses in ruins. But Rashford knew something the Japanese didn't. The Americans were learning, adapting, and preparing to strike back. "Sir, another intercept from the Japanese Fourth Fleet," said one of his crypt analysts, placing a freshly decoded message on Rashford's cluttered desk. They were requesting additional supplies for something called Operation MI. Rashford's tired eyes blazed with intensity. For weeks, his team had been tracking fragments of a massive Japanese operation. The enemy was planning something that would dwarf even Pearl Harbor. But where? When? The coded designation AF appeared repeatedly in the intercepts, taunting them with its mystery. If they could crack this puzzle, they might turn the tide of the entire war. Admiral Chester Nimitz stood at the window of his headquarters, gazing out at salvage crews still working to raise the sunken battleships. The white-haired Texan had taken command of the Pacific Fleet at its darkest hour, inheriting a demoralized force and an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Behind him, his intelligence officer, Commander Edwin Layton, cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, Rashford's team believes they've identified a pattern in the Japanese communications. Something major is being planned for early June. The scale suggests it's their largest operation since the war began." Nimitz turned from the window, his ice-blue eyes focused intently on Layton. "How certain are they?" he asked, the weight of command pressing down on every word. "Every decision could mean life or death for thousands of sailors and Marines." "Rashford stakes his career on it, sir," Layton replied without hesitation. "He believes the target is somewhere in the Central Pacific. His team is working around the clock to pinpoint the exact location." The Admiral nodded slowly. If Rashford was right, this could be the opportunity they desperately needed. The Japanese had been advancing across the Pacific like a tidal wave, capturing island after island, building an empire that stretched from the home islands to the shores of Australia. But every empire had its limits, and perhaps the enemy was finally overreaching. Down in the Cryptanalysis Center, Rashford's team worked with feverish intensity. The basement room was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale coffee. Banks of IBM tabulating machines clattered endlessly, sorting through thousands of code groups. Men and women in rumpled uniforms pored over worksheets, searching for patterns in the seemingly random characters. "I've got something," announced Lieutenant Commander Wesley Hamright, one of Rashford's top cryptanalysts. The Japanese repeatedly referenced water desalination equipment for AF. Why would they need special water supplies for a major naval base? Rashford felt the pieces clicking into place. A location that would need additional water supplies, somewhere strategically important enough to warrant a massive operation, it had to be Midway. Lieutenant Commander Jasper Holmes proposed an ingenious plan. "What if we have Midway report water supply problems? If the Japanese mention it in their coded traffic, we'll know AF is Midway." "Get me a secure line to Layton," Rashford ordered. "Tell Midway to send an emergency message in plain language, saying their water distillation plant has broken down." Meanwhile, aboard the carrier USS Enterprise, Admiral William Bull Halsey lay in sick bay, his body ravaged by a severe case of dermatitis. The bold, instinctive commander who had led early carrier raids against Japanese-held islands was now too ill to stand. His task force was about to sail into the most important battle of the war, and he wouldn't be leading it. "Bill, you look like hell," said Admiral Raymond Spruance, visiting his old friend. The two men were opposites. Halsey was aggressive and impulsive, while Spruance was calculating and methodical, but they shared deep respect for each other and an unshakable determination to defeat Japan. "Ray, I'm giving you my command," Halsey said weakly. "Take my boys and hit those bastards hard. They trust you, and so do I." Spruance nodded solemnly. He had never led carriers in combat before, but he understood the principles of naval warfare better than almost anyone. More importantly, he knew how to listen to his subordinates and make decisions based on facts rather than emotion. These qualities would soon be tested in ways no one could imagine. On Midway itself, Marine Colonel Harold Shannon inspected his ragtag collection of aircraft. The tiny atoll's air group was a mixed bag: obsolete Brewster Buffalo fighters, proven inferior to the Japanese Zero, alongside a handful of newer Wildcat fighters and various bombers. His pilots were mostly green, fresh from training with little combat experience. "Colonel, are we really expected to stop the Japanese Navy with these?" asked Major Lofton Henderson, gesturing at the lined-up buffaloes. "We'll stop them or die trying," Shannon replied grimly. "Every minute we delay them gives the Navy a better chance to hit their carriers. That's our job. Buy time with everything we've got." Back at Pearl Harbor, confirmation came through from Rashford's team. Japanese intelligence had reported in their coded messages that AF was experiencing water shortages. The target was definitely Midway. Armed with this crucial intelligence, Nimitz called his senior commanders to an urgent meeting. "Gentlemen, we know where they're going and approximately when," Nimitz announced. "The Japanese are sending at least 4 carriers to attack Midway in early June. This is our chance to ambush them." Captain Miles Browning, Halsey's chief of staff, who would now serve under Spruance, studied the intelligence reports. "Sir, our pilots report at least 6 Japanese carriers operational. If they bring them all, they won't." Nimitz interrupted with quiet confidence. "Our intelligence indicates they're splitting their forces. 2 carriers are heading for the Aleutians as a diversion. That leaves 4 for Midway, and we'll be waiting with 3. The mathematics were still daunting. The Japanese carriers Akagi, Kaga, Saryu, and Hiryu were veterans of Pearl Harbor and the Indian Ocean raids. Their pilots were the best in the world, with years of combat experience. The American carriers Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown had brave crews but far less experience. Moreover, Yorktown had been badly damaged at the Battle of Coral Sea and was limping back to Pearl Harbor. "How long to repair Yorktown?" Nimitz asked, turning to his maintenance officer. 3 months minimum, Admiral. Significant damage to the flight deck and fuel systems." "You have 3 days," Nimitz said flatly. "Whatever it takes, I want that ship operational and sailing with the others." The maintenance officer's jaw dropped, but she saw the determination in Nimitz's eyes. "Yes, sir. We'll work around the clock." As May drew to a close, Pearl Harbor became a hive of desperate activity. 1,400 workers swarmed over Yorktown, welding, hammering, and installing new equipment. Men worked until collapse, knowing that every rivet they drove, every plate they welded, might make the difference between victory and defeat. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, one of the Navy's premier fighter tacticians, gathered his pilots aboard Yorktown. He had developed new tactics specifically to counter the superior maneuverability of the Japanese Zero. "Listen up," Thatch addressed his young aviators. "The Zero can outturn us, outclimb us, and it's faster, but it's lightly built. Our Wildcats can take punishment and keep flying. We're going to use a new formation I call the Thatch Weave. Work in pairs, cover each other, and never dogfight a Zero one-on-one." Among the pilots was Ensign George Gay, fresh from flight school with barely 300 hours of flight time. The young Texan tried to hide his nervousness as Thatch explained how they would attack the Japanese fleet. Torpedo bombers would go low and slow, perfect targets for enemy fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Everyone knew it was practically a suicide mission, but no one voiced their fears. In the intelligence offices, analysts pieced together the complete Japanese order of battle. They knew Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, was personally commanding the operation. The strike force would be led by Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, who had commanded at Pearl Harbor. Japanese confidence was overwhelming. They intended to finish what they had started 6 months earlier.